I'm Yulia Yani, CEO of Relatam, and our new episode of innovation slash technologies slash commercial mortgage podcast. I am hosting Eric Floor, who is Senior Vice President of Transformations at Berkadia Commercial Mortgage. I'm asking you to tell us about your background, about your dogs, about your kids, about your guitars, and how did you get to be an SVP of transformation at one of the largest commercial mortgage players in the industry?
Of course. Well, thank you for the kind words about Berkadia. So I started my career as a management consultant, and I spent 7 years working at Deloitte Consulting. I was very fortunate. I was able to work in multiple different countries around the world. I spent some time working in Europe, spent some time in Latin America, North America, obviously, as well as Asia. After that, I also spent some time working in the Middle East for a family investment office, which was looking to make investments in emerging markets. And then after having spent probably 90% of the previous 8 years traveling in an either hotel or in an airplane, decided it would be nice to actually live in my own home for once. So I relocated back to Philadelphia and began working at Berkadia. My role at Berkadia is quite broad. I'm very fortunate that I'm able to touch all parts of our organization, as well as work quite closely with a number of our lender partners and outside clients. I am responsible for helping to lead our digital transformation. That involves managing our engagement with the prop tech community and our Be Engaged Startup Accelerator program. I'm also responsible for working very closely with our business leadership to help re-engineer processes to make sure that we can take advantage of technology developments. And then I also have a team which works for me in our offshore location in India, which is responsible for driving process improvements in our location in Hyderabad.
I guess that's how you got your elephants on the background, right?
Correct. Every time I go to India, my team is kind enough to give me a gift, and I think I'm building a herd of elephants in my office.
Well, you will be one of the luckiest people in the world. You know, elephants bring luck, right?
I hope so, and certainly after the way 2020 was, I think we could all use a little bit of luck.
So tell me a little bit more about the innovations, transformations that you're doing within Berkadia, because I assume it's very challenging, especially within large organizations. So tell me a little bit more about the program first, about what you're doing within the program, and then we can talk, more about that.
Of course, you highlighted one of the things which is very near and dear to the innovation community, which is a lot of times the larger, more incumbent organizations can struggle with innovation. And in some cases, whether it be cultural resistance or individual resistance, can actually really put in jeopardy an innovation program. You can contrast that, though, with startups who may have great ideas and the freedom to do all sorts of really cool, interesting things. But then the challenge is the lack of capital, the lack of scale, the lack of resources to actually execute on those. So it is a challenge. And so at Berkadia, I think we're doing some really interesting things, not only to help drive change within Berkadia, but also address some of those cultural conflicts that you might find in trying to innovate at a large organization. We are working very closely with a number of our borrowers and a number of our clients to try and make sure that the overall transaction process with Berkadia is a very smooth, frictionless experience. When you think about a commercial real estate transaction, there are dozens of stakeholders who participate. There's a lot of documents, there's a lot of email traffic, and it's very difficult to know from an end-to-end standpoint, how long is the deal taking, where's my deal at? I've constantly got to provide more and more information and documents to get that deal done. So we're trying to develop ways to eliminate some of that friction and make for a much more seamless client experience. We're also looking for a way, can we use the scale that Berkadia operates in? We're national across the US in almost every major city. We're present in investment sales, mortgage banking, as well as servicing. Can we leverage the data and insights that we collect and really help our clients make more effective and efficient investment decisions in terms of when they might want to dispose of an asset versus refinance, what particular markets might they want to finance in, where might they want to finance. And then finally, once we have a signature on the dotted line, we're working to make sure that as we close that transaction and ultimately end up servicing that transaction, that our client has the absolute best possible customer experience.
Let me ask you a tricky question. Do you see your professionals, Berkadia professionals, either investment sales or mortgage brokers or agency originations, are they just producers, or they also advisors? Like, is their goal just to close the deal, or their goal to build relationship and be useful to their clients in any other capacity?
That's a great question. And I would say that's an area that we've seen a tremendous amount of change in the last 5 to 10 years. I think what a mortgage banker or an investment sales advisor was 10 years ago is much, much different today. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is the client base has continued to consolidate. You now have very large owner operators. They're at national scale, which in some cases may not even have been present in the multifamily space 3 to 5 years ago. You're seeing a much greater and widespread availability of data, which means in the past, information that you may have called your investment advisor or your mortgage banker for, you don't need to do that because you can actually find that on your own. And so what's that meant is our producers can no longer just be order takers, but they actually need to evolve their role to become more of a capital advisor. And in some cases, that may mean that we delay a refinancing, we don't actually put a property on market and provide that advice, knowing that it's going to create more value for both the client and then ultimately Berkadia in the long run, versus saying, let's just focus on closing that transaction today. And that's certainly an evolution that the industry is going through. And my personal belief is, if you're an investment advisor or mortgage banker and you're not in that advisory space, I think you're going to have a really hard time retaining clients 3, 5, 7 years out.
So I understand that shift from just being order taker to being an advisor. How does your innovation transformation processes contribute to them being those valuable advisors?
Absolutely. That is a big focus of ours at the moment. And there's a couple of ways that we are trying to do that. One, as I mentioned earlier, we are really trying to use data that we collect about a property or transaction and supplement that not only with a lot of the traditional data and information that commercial brokerage may have, but also look at alternative data points. Are there data points that we can collect from, say, a credit agency? Is there information that we can get from a company which is in the IoT space that would help us better understand what potential capital improvements may or may not need to be made based on the performance of, say, HVAC equipment or water equipment in that building, and really help our clients get a much more granular understanding of that property, its current operating performance, as well as what potentially it may operate in the future. That's a lot of the areas where we spend our time and really try to give those insights for our producers to provide that advice. We've also tried to break down, to the degree possible, any barriers internally within collaboration. I know you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast some of the challenges around larger companies' innovations. Unfortunately, sometimes there are silos and priorities and things like that. We've tried to break those down as best we can to make sure that we're giving the answer which is best for the client, and not necessarily what may be the best for that particular business unit of Berkadia at that particular point in time. And then third, as I mentioned, we're also trying to make it very easy to do business with Berkadia. Can we get to a point where if you're thinking about listing a property with us, it's not a 2, 3, 4, 5 week process to get that BOV created, but we can actually turn that around much faster because we've made it easier for you to interact with us. But we've also made it easy so that when we get that information, we have the tools, infrastructure, processes, and resources to quickly turn that around and get that back to you. Because today, with how fast the market's changing, if there is a very unique insight, oftentimes the shelf life of that is very short because someone else is going to find it and they're going to act on it as well.
So let me ask you, you're running an innovation program. I understand you guys didn't start today, so you've been doing it for some time. So what, from your perspective, what is the most important thing to get right in your innovation management program when you're starting it and when you're progressing with that?
Wow. So now the tough questions begin. It was easy up until now. So it would be very tough for me to limit it to just one thing, but I'll try not to give a laundry list and scare anyone who maybe hasn't gotten started. I would say first is, I'll refer actually back to a book I read when I was a child. There was a book I read that said, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up somewhere else. And so I think that's actually very applicable to innovation efforts. is you need to have
we're going to quote you on that, right?
you absolutely, you can quote me on that. So you do need to have a good idea of where you're going. There are some people who say, there's innovation and it's very unpredictable. You need to constantly be pivoting and adapting and adjusting based on feedback and users, market developments. Completely agree. But if you do that, you're just going to be like a tail blown in the wind and you're never actually going to get anything done. You do need to have a good idea of what does that end state look like? What are we moving towards? But then allow enough space that you can slightly pivot, adjust, reprioritize as needed. But I am a very firm believer that if you don't have an idea of what the future end state you're striving for is going to look like at a high level, you're not actually going to produce meaningful results. You're just simply going to change priorities every 90 days, every 180 days, and not actually get anything done. So I think that is one of the big things, is really think about what does that future end state look like? How can we define that as a high level? How does it impact our business? How does it impact our clients? How does it impact users? How do we potentially organize ourselves differently to execute and move forward? And then along with that, because you are asking people to do things differently, let's be honest, particularly in the multifamily space, the last 10 years have been great. And this is a Warren Buffett quote, so I'll give credit for him, but the rising tide does lift all boats. And so it's very easy for people to say, I don't need to worry about this. Everything's great. My phone's ringing off the hook. Why do I have to worry about trying to shift to be an advisor? Why do I have to learn how to use this new tool? Why do we need new processes?
So sorry for interrupting you, but you're so right, because we're hearing this all the time across the industry, people saying, I'm making a lot of money. Right. Why do I need to bother about innovations? Why do I need to think about new technology? My checks are coming in, I'm closing the transactions.
You're absolutely right. And it can be a tough argument. And I think, if anything, COVID was a terrible event for the world. It had personal impact on a lot of individuals and terrible personal impact. However, I think it opened a lot of people's eyes that things can actually change really, really quickly. It really can change at the snap of fingers. And so if you're not prepared for that, then you're going to be left behind. And this is a little bit downstream from Berkadia's space, but I think of myself, when I own a home, but if I were interested in renting, and in the past I have rented, yes, I needed to see the leasing agent. I needed to take a tour of the property. I needed to see the unit. I wanted to experience some of the amenities before I made my call. And that was everyone up until March of 2020. And suddenly, March 15th of 2020, as work from home and those sorts of things, stay-at-home orders were put into place, you end up with, well, we actually can't have a leasing agent give a tour. What do we do? And companies who had started to build some of those 3D capabilities, or maybe virtual reality, or started investing in self-guided tours, which was kind of a crazy idea 18 months ago, suddenly we're able to pivot very quickly and able to say, wow, I'm actually driving the higher outcome, which is a greater likelihood of my prospect signing a lease. And it's actually lower cost because I'm able to use facial recognition technology to let people into the unit. I'm allowing it to be a self-guided tour. Maybe I'm allowing people to use the iPhone to check in at different spots and get access as they go throughout their tour. They can do it at their own time and leisure. It doesn't have to be coordinating between somebody who's working 60 hours a week and my leasing agent who's got other appointments. They're actually able to get higher outcomes. And again, if you didn't invest in that, well, you were 6 months behind scrambling, trying to get that organized. And people who did were actually able to move very quickly. And so, I think that resistance you mentioned, which certainly we've heard and experienced the last 5-10 years, I suspect going forward is going to be a little bit different, because people realize if you aren't proactive and you don't make some of these investments, you can be really caught off guard when there is a market shift.
So interesting. I think you started talking about the obstacles that you're facing within introducing innovations and transforming how people think. But how do you address those obstacles?
Sure. So I would say I don't think there's a silver bullet. I think it actually takes multiple different methods to try and address that. Some of it is we're also undergoing a cultural change at Berkadia. And a lot of it is really trying to understand and align around what are the objectives you're trying to achieve. And so, Yulia, if I put you in the shoes of one of our investment sales advisors, is one of your objectives to use technology? Is it to always be at the cutting edge of technology? Probably not. your objective is, how do I close more deals? How do I get more
Yes.
clients? How do I be more successful? And so you can't go with, sometimes some of us technologists can fall into this of, I have this great new tool and let me tell you about all the features of the tool. That generally gets a pretty bad reception. It's more, let me tell you about how this can actually help you close more deals, be more competitive in the market, win new clients. Let me show you some things maybe that you don't know about the market or you don't know about a new client. Let me prepare you for that first meeting with the new client and give you some more insights that before you might have had your analyst or maybe one of your marketing assistants spend 3-4 days preparing a lot of material for you just to get up to speed, let alone the content you're actually present to the client. We can now click some buttons and actually empower you with that information right away. You want to see that data differently? Okay, great. Let me slice that data differently. So I think it really is, trying to link and understand what are the objectives that individual is trying to achieve, and how can you tailor what you're working on to them. Secondly, we've also had really great success at changing incentives and compensation as well to really drive this. So for example, if you're an analyst at Berkadia, you now need to go through a certification program that you can demonstrate capabilities that you can use a lot of the technology we built for you to progress to a senior analyst and ultimately on to an associate mortgage banker, say, for example. And that's obviously driving people to, they want to get to the next level, they've got to show that. Another thing is, I think, constant communication of success stories. And we are constantly preparing our executives with, next time you're talking with the producer, here's an example of a success story you can use. We have structured communications that we send out to our company with success stories. We, in some cases, even share those with our clients as well, and really try to celebrate. Here's an example of where someone maybe was in a really competitive situation. They were either able to respond to the client faster or they had deeper insights because they're using some of the tools we're building. It was a much more seamless client experience. And as a result of that, we generated, X in terms of fees, or that clients become very loyal to us now.
Let me ask you, and sorry for interrupting. I mean, you can influence, I understand you can influence analysts this way. They're impressionable young things, right? They want to progress in their careers. But, do you producers, hardcore, that been in the industry for 20 years, do they really buy these things?
That's a fascinating question. And I'll tell you, it does depend. But, the things that we've tried to tap into is typically, if you're a top producer, you constantly want to be on the cutting edge. You're just, I'll use almost an athletic analogy. You're like Tom Brady. You constantly want to, yes, maybe I just won the Super Bowl, but what can I do to win it again? What can I do to go to another team and win the Super Bowl? And so if you can find a way to tap into that, to say, yes, you are a number 1 or number 2 or number 3 mortgage banking team, but you know what? You still only close 12, 15%, 20% of the loans you quote. What if we could make that 3% higher, 5% higher? That translates into an extra, $1.5 million in fees.
So that translates in an extra Ferrari, right?
Correct. And so, it's interesting. We do have some of our top teams, and maybe the producer themselves is not intimately familiar with every single field that we have in our CRM system or every single field we have in some of our tools or exactly where the data is coming from. But they can understand it, want to communicate to their client, this is the value of working with Berkadia. We have all of these capabilities. Other people don't. This is why you should work with Berkadia. And then they drive that within their team and make sure their team is actually able to use that. And when we were in person, we had a lot of the individuals who are responsible for helping roll out these technologies and these changes. They would routinely get phone calls from our top producers saying, I need you to come to my office and make sure that everyone in my office knows how to use this. And you can really tap into that competitive spirit, because then you go to, say you went to the number 4 producer and you met with their team and they're all trained and using these tools. Then you go to the number 3 producer and say, by the way, look at this person, his or her team's actually doing really well this year. They're gaining on you, and here's why. And now you need to come out to my office and really get my team excited in using this. So, would I say that our top producers can go in and spend 3 hours a day using these tools? Honestly, the answer is probably not. However, they know it well enough, they can communicate that to their clients. And on top of that, they drive that culture throughout their team so that way everyone on their team is getting involved and really helping push the ball forward.
So let me ask you, I mean, producers, their assets, I mean, any company on the market, any of your competitors will be happy to have them. I mean, do you hear this from them? Hey, if you bother me one more time with your technology, I will move to Cushman or to other.
And I think it really is how you approach it. If you approach it, there's a corporate mandate, you must do this, you're going to get resistance, and honestly, they're probably not going to do it.
Yeah.
But if you can link it to their goals, which again are more deals, more clients, making more money, if you can link what you're doing to that and communicate that value to them, what we found is actually a retention tool. As you mentioned, they are assets. They can move around. Generally, the teams will go with them. It's not just one producer that moves. And so what you find is, oh, well, if I did go to a competitor, I might not have all these tools. I would have to set up all this infrastructure. That's going to take time. I'm going to be out of the market. That's bad. And here at Berkadia, we've got all this infrastructure in place. It's very seamless. I can't be as competitive without these tools in the market. And so therefore, when someone does approach me, I'm not as open as it might have been otherwise. And so we've actually found it to be the other way of it's actually becoming a retention tool rather than an irritant that might cause somebody to look elsewhere.
Got it. So let me ask you a tricky question again. You guys obviously smaller than some of your larger competitors. I mean, you're half size in terms of revenue than Walker Dunlop. But I know that you starting your innovation transformation program earlier than some of your other competitors. Right. I mean, you have a team in India, you guys have a very strong team here. Do you think what you're doing right now will help you to get ahead and, ahead of your competitors in sooner than later?
Yeah, I think so. There's a couple of advantages that we have relative to some of our other competitors. One of those is a predominant focus on multifamily, which I think really simplifies what you need to do versus being able to support, say, leasing for retail or office or things like that. Secondly, we are a privately held organization. Berkshire Hathaway is one of our owners. That gives us a much different perspective. We're able to really invest for the long term and invest for 5-10 years out and not necessarily need to manage earnings every single quarter to hit the results that we need. And third, our leadership is completely bought into what we're doing. It's part of our vision statement. It's part of our core values is that we innovate, we take the long view, we stand for excellence, and it is even part of what we, particularly on the corporate side when we're hiring, is we do look for individuals who will embrace new ideas, will help us solve problems and help move the ball forward, not just someone who will sit at their desk and shuffle some paper around and preserve and defend the status quo. And so I personally think for not only Berkadia, but I think for a lot of organizations, this sort of effort is borderline existential. And if you're not actually heavily investing in these sorts of efforts, you really need to think long and hard about what your business is going to look like 5 or 10 years out and get started very quickly.
I will quote you on that. I love that, existential problems for the mortgage companies. Well, now I'm going to ask you something that is real close to my heart, and I would like to hear how you guys solving it, within your company. We all know that startups fail, but so we also know that new business models fail within large organizations. So can you maybe comment why new business models fail and how innovation management can help?
Sure. It's not easy to be an entrepreneur. I think that's the new buzzword for an entrepreneur inside of a larger organization. I personally believe very much in Clayton Christensen's work around the innovator's dilemma and the innovator's solution, which is, and I'm paraphrasing his work, but briefly, that if you have a new business model inside of a larger company, oftentimes that can be viewed as a threat to your existing cash flow. In some cases, resources are not assigned to that, or in some cases, it's viewed as threatening to the legacy business. And so it's always fighting for the attention it needs. It's always fighting to get the resources it needs. Also, oftentimes companies do layer on a lot of very heavy overhead and infrastructure and policies, procedures, systems requirements that can really make it difficult for an innovation effort to really take off. And so I think some of the things that we've done in Berkadia successfully is when we've had some new ideas and things like that, first we've incubated them. A lot of times they may start off in our innovation group, and then as they prove themselves, they may migrate actually over into an established business. Secondly, we do a lot of piloting. We try to keep these very lightweight, very quick, very low investment to say, here's a concept. What is the true minimum effort we need to put in to see if this concept works? Get feedback from customers, get feedback from users, see how the market is viewing that, and then potentially pivot or shift based on that feedback, as opposed to saying, hey, we're going to spend 3 years building something and then release it. And if it doesn't work, well, we've just wasted millions of dollars and a lot of time. But we really do embrace that piloting. And then I think another thing that you really need to do is be very clear-headed about your success criteria. It's much easier to do that before you launch the effort. When you've spent a few weeks or months in the pilot, you're starting to see some traction, but maybe it's not taking off quite as much as you think. That sunk cost trap really becomes real. And it's, well, if we just hang in there, if we just do a little bit more, yeah, we wanted 10%, but 8% is close enough. You start becoming really biased. And so I think you really need to set that performance criteria up front. And then lastly, you need to make it okay in your culture to fail. There are new ideas that aren't going to work. There are ideas that are ahead of their time. Things aren't going to play out the way you think. And so if you make it such that you can't fail in your organization, you're going to end up with two outcomes. Either one, no one's going to have a new idea, and so they're just going to sit tight. Or even worse, they're going to do their best to make a failing idea look good. And so that's going to prolong the investment, prolong the decisions, and ultimately lead to a not good outcome. And so you really need to culturally make it okay to fail, but fail fast. Celebrate that, hey, we had someone who had an idea, we tried it, it didn't work, they stood up, they recognized it, they admitted it, they're moving on, we've got something else for them to do, and that's okay. And if you don't do that, you really do lead to some really bad outcomes where you're going to pour millions and millions of dollars and years of effort into something that someone knew 6 months after launch this was not going to work. And so I think you really need to balance some of those factors if you're going to introduce some new business models or truly disruptive innovation within inside a larger organization.
You mentioned that you're piloting your new ideas, and I assume you're piloting them with real users, right?
Generally, yes. Yeah, we'll either do that internally. In some cases, we may approach some of our borrowers or potential sellers on the investment sales side saying, hey, here's a new idea, a new concept. We think it's going to make your life easier. We think it's going to make our life easier. Would you be willing to do this? Some cases they say no, and that's completely fine. But in most cases, I would say we get a very good reception, and the number of times we get that reception, it's actually going up the last few years. And again, I think it's because there is this cultural change that's happening within commercial real estate. We're realizing the future is going to be different, and people are much more willing to do things differently than they did in the past.
And that's what I wanted to ask. I mean, you said that you're getting better reception. I mean, if you're constantly testing new ideas, don't those groups become fatigued with testing for you?
Sure. So, I would say that's the benefit of being a large company is we have, hundreds, if not 1,000 plus customers that we can go to. And so we do try to look at different factors when we figure out who to approach. So that way we're not overloading someone. Prioritization is important. Even at a company like Berkadia or even some of our larger competitors, you can't solve every problem every day. But what we found is if you craft an effective value proposition, you set the right expectations, you try to minimize the amount of time and effort they need to put in, and you work through, say, your producer to have that conversation and facilitate that introduction, then most of the time you get a very positive reception.
Thank you. And the last question for today, without giving away corporate secrets, please tell us what is the new frontier that you're trying to solve, or what is the next problem that you're trying to tackle right now?
Sure. So I would classify it as how do we effectively distribute. I want to start over on that question. So I'm giving you a bad answer, and the spam guy's been calling me like 10 times today from the same phone number. It's very distracting. So let's see. how would I explain that without letting another company go do it?
I know, I know.
Yeah. So actually, here's what I can say is. Um, we've talked a lot about the importance of insights, and we're really trying to put actionable insights in the hands of our producers, who ultimately will help our clients to make better investment decisions. And there's a lot of really great information out there, but it's not necessarily collected in a timely fashion, or it's not necessarily in the easiest format to digest. And then there are also some really new emerging data points that we think can provide very insightful information to the market. And how do you bring those two together, where there's the data that the industry has used for a very long time to make decisions, and then there's some new emerging data being available that we think could be more timely, as well as could help with being more forward-looking, maybe than what we've traditionally looked at, but it doesn't necessarily have complete coverage. It's not necessarily in a format where it's very easy to compare to what we've done. And as we've talked about earlier, it can be a little challenging sometimes to change industry standards or the status quo. And so how do you actually bring that together and make that happen? Not something we figured out yet, but hopefully sometime in 2021, we'll have it figured out.
Good answer. You didn't give away anything.
So I still have a job.
And the new section that I'm introducing today, I want my speakers to talk about one startup on the market, and not Relatum, of course, sure. That you think that will bring a lot of change to commercial real estate mortgage space.
Sure. So I'll talk about a company which is in our Be Engaged Startup Accelerator program. I think there's a company called
Can you quickly just talk about your Be Engaged Accelerator?
Yeah. So Yulia, we launched let me start over. Yulia, we launched a startup accelerator program 2 years ago called Be Engaged. The intent of the program is to help foster startups that we think might have something useful for either Berkadia or our clients in the future. And so we give feedback on their business plans. We help facilitate introductions to potential pilot users, pilot customers. We use the software in many cases ourselves and give very raw, unvarnished feedback. We're happy to help monitor their progress and at the right time, maybe potentially adopt and use their software internally. So one of the companies in our program that I think has some great potential is a company called Isusu. What they do is they work with owners and operators as well as tenants to have your monthly rent payment count as a credit qualifying event. And when you think about what's happening with access to affordable housing, and in potential cases, there are some individuals who have a challenge in accessing credit markets or building credit based on the fact maybe they have hourly jobs and don't qualify for pre-approved credit cards and those sorts of things. It can be really difficult for them to access the financial markets and financial institutions. Isusu works with those landlords, and Isusu has their rent payments captured and then reports those to the credit agency, such that over a 12, 24-month period, if you pay your rent on time, you have 12, 24 months of credit qualifying events and can really make a meaningful increase in the credit score for that tenant, which provides all sorts of future opportunities. I think it's a great win-win, both for the landlord, who gets a competitive advantage in the market, a potential tool to retain tenants who might be more willing to move at the end of their lease. I think the tenant gets improved access to the credit markets and hopefully an improved lifestyle. And so I think it's a true win-win, both for society as well as for the users of the application.
It is a great model. I mean, definitely a lot of social impact, and those users, they definitely can benefit from that. How do you spell the name of the company?
ESUSU.
Okay, awesome.
Yes,
and what companies should apply to your accelerator? And that, I know we're part of your accelerator, but tell us a little bit, because a lot of prop tech startups will be happy to do that, I'm sure.
Sure. So I would say we're generally looking at startups which would have something to offer for either Berkadia's core business, which is generally a multifamily transaction. That could be a sale, that could be a financing or refinancing or servicing of an asset, or something that is directly related to how our clients, who are the owners and operators, run their properties. We typically do want the company to have a product, have some revenue. We're not generally looking at concepts or ideas but we're generally looking for companies to have a product, they have some users, they're able to demonstrate some revenue, and then we'll generally take that up until generally the point in time where they might be looking for like a Series B or C that's kind of, at that point in time, you've kind of outgrown the program. So we do not take an ownership stake. It is very much a kind of help you to help us type of program. And we think by helping these startups grow and thrive, that ultimately it's helping the entire commercial real estate industry transform. And that helps both our clients, which means it's also helping Berkadia.
And it's not that you are not only taking stake in the company, you also feed startups very well. I remember those dinners before COVID.
If I'm going to have a meeting, we're going to have a good lunch or dinner.
Good. I'm looking forward to, meeting again in person and going for all those Italian dinners.
Absolutely. I am as well.
Eric, thank you so much. It was so much fun to have you on my podcast. Again, I'm Yulia Yani, CEO and co-founder of Realatom. We're a lending as a service platform for commercial real estate lending industry. And today, my guest was Senior Vice President of Transformation at Berkadia Commercial Mortgage, Eric Flohr.
My pleasure, Yulia. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.